Our final panel, we're pleased to welcome somebody who is a veteran of both ends of Pennsylvania Avenue. Shalanda Young spent about 14 years on Capitol Hill, and now she runs the country through the OMB. And a conversation with Margaret Spellings. We should point out that Senator Sheldon Whitehouse was invited to be here. He is tied up in the Senate, so he is not here with us at the moment. So we're pleased to have a conversation between our president and the OMB director, and that will begin momentarily. Thank you, gentlemen, for being with us.
Thank you, Director Young, for joining us. And thank you, gentlemen, for a fantastically fascinating panel. Well, as Steve said, you have had the benefit. And may I say this, we're going to end on time because Director Young has a child to get to, and, we value our priorities.
And if you knew me on the Hill, everyone's still like, "Oh my God, you had a child." I'm nicer and softer now.
Oh, yeah. Senior, it's easy to be nice and soft to that precious Charlie of yours. All right. Well, so you have had the perspective of being at both ends of Pennsylvania Avenue. And, obviously, I've been a member of the executive branch and the president's budget process and all of that. Talk about where you see things now. We're here to talk about and commemorate, not celebrate, the Congressional Budget Act on its 50th anniversary. What are your observations about what's working, what's not working, particularly given the two perspectives you've had? How long do we have?
Yeah, that's a loaded question. I want to make sure to get to other questions.
Yeah.
Hi Terry, how you doing? It's good to see everyone. That's the problem with coming back home, right? You
Mhm.
see all the people you got to work with for a long time, and that has been beneficial in my current job. Having more interaction between the legislative and executive branch is a good thing. Having people understand the ebbs and flow of the House and Senate when they are in the executive branch. So I'm able to at least say, well, wait a minute, how's the Hill going to react to that? Because I think, we have political realities. There are some process things we absolutely should look at and work on. We haven't had on-time appropriations bills all done on time since 1994, I believe, when Obie and Byrd, Obie was my first boss, were chairs of the House and Senate Appropriations Committee. So you can't look and say it's all working.
Mhm.
The good news side of that is it does get done. It's just really ugly. And it's a grind for the people who work on those things. And people ask me how I can have a 2.5-year-old now. I go, because I've worked for the Appropriations Committee, uh, and my schedule's better now.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, we have to take a good look at what processes can be fixed if the data's right. What 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 are the best processes to make this easier? But at the end of the day, we cannot ignore that the politics of today are different than they were when the Congressional Budget Act were written. Um, and you can have all the good processes in the world. We have a 2-year budget cap deal now. Doesn't mean we're going to be on time. Because it's politically difficult. We have tighter majorities, and it takes a lot of hand holding and relationships.
Mhm.
And I'm glad I've gotten to do some version of this for 23 years. And I know a lot of people I can still call and we can have those conversations like, you got to be kidding me. I can't do that. And they can say the same thing to me. And the more you lose that, and the more turnover you have, it makes a tough situation almost impossible.
Yeah, one of the things that came up in one of the panels is this issue of debt and deficits, and that it's your folks ahead of you said that debt and deficit doesn't matter as much. I mean, aren't those same guardrails, that same kind of what are the rules of the road and so forth.
Yeah.
And so the wheels are off a little bit. And so how do we either restore that or reframe? What are the rules of the road and how we get people back to kind of respecting processes, regular order, or whatever.
You got to know what outcomes you're trying to achieve. We say these things: get on a better fiscal path, regular order. Well, at the end of the day, what are we trying to accomplish? Especially for the appropriations process, you want something that does not generate news headlines about potential shutdowns
Mhm.
every 3 weeks or 8 weeks. If it gets done and it feels smooth November 1st versus October 1st, I will not lose sleep. As a matter of fact, I might go throw a party of some sort. But what to me seems unhealthy in our democracy, when the American people start to get nervous about appropriations bills, that concerns me. Um, I grew up, I never heard of an appropriations bill in my life, and that was okay. Um, so it is a process that should be one of the things we do because it's our job. I mean, it isn't tough, but we got to find a way to stop having a process that makes America feel a little rocky. On debt and deficits, we have to have a fiscal path, in my opinion, where smart economists tell us what a healthy level, a percentage of GDP debt is, and we don't hit each other over the head on the overall number, but know what our healthy margin should be, what our real net interest is as a percent of GDP, and have an honest dialogue. We're going to carry debt in this country. It's a large economy. But what are some healthy parameters that make sense? No one talks about that. I go to hearing like 34 trillion debt. It is a lot. It's too much. But if you talk to any economist, they will tell you there are markers that make sense where it is where the economy is going along. We can afford the investments in the American people. I answered a question at a hearing. What about a balanced budget? I said, what does that mean to the American people? It sounds fine until you hear what that does to Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid. And then what are the costs of people not having those safety nets? We're going to pay for it one way or another. So we've got to figure out a way to take it out of the political environment and talk about what are those measures that make sense from an economic standpoint. So our economy is healthy and have levels that allow us to keep having investments. And frankly, to me, we do scorekeeping, CBO, OMB. It's hard to change scorekeeping rules on purpose. Those are the kinds of things that keep everyone honest. So we're very reluctant to change those things. But in my view, I think if some smart people that are not me and other people who work for elected officials are elected, sit down and go, there are some programs, maybe like childcare and early education, that are more investments that might have longer term benefits outside the 10-year window. Maybe we should look at those differently. Um, and all that answer goes back to we got to find a way to take it out of political process, to deal with debt and deficits, but to define what deal with is. And a lot of times we don't have that conversation.
So you all at OMB obviously kick off the budget process with the president's budget, what I used to call the one-day budget. But maybe you can steal that. I don't know. But it does. It's the opener. It's the proposed to be disposed, et cetera. And you all, I'm going to put two questions together here. Have a lot of priorities, obviously, student debt, climate, et cetera. I mean, how do you think about establishing your priorities and kicking off that process and stewarding it all along the way on
Yeah.
behalf of your boss?
Remember we talked about regular order and process?
Yeah.
We get a lot of flack. You're not on time. You're not on time. And I hope he took this in the fashion in which it was delivered. I meant it, but in jest. If you give me an appropriation bill on time, I give you a budget on time. I mean, I was a month late. We got our bill 6 months late. And he goes, "Well, you don't need last year to be finished to do next year." Like, you should.
Yeah.
Absolutely should.
Yeah.
And either we take this seriously or we don't. If the budget is built on things that are not real and out of date by the time you get it, then you're going to get what process you put into it. If you think last year's budget shouldn't inform next year's budget, then you're right. You are setting the stage for this process not being taken seriously, and that's where we are now. So you're right. We should be the kickoff. But this year, I was testifying on our 25 budget as Congress was releasing the details of 24, and people were like, "Why is this program lower than this?" Like, because I didn't know what you were going to say.
Yeah.
I didn't know it was my best guess. Um, but trust me, we support that program. You all just went a little higher than I thought you would. So it's difficult. It's not always a start. Sometimes we are finishing as we start. We're doing Ukraine and Israel, and Indo-Pacific now.
Yep.
The supplementals have, I started my career on the Appropriations Committee doing disaster response. Supplementals are always something
Mhm.
we do off cycle, and they're incredibly important. And, I think the Appropriations Committee got me ready for, speak of prioritizing priorities.
Mhm.
I just replaced a bunch of appropriations chairs with cabinet secretaries, like your former job. So I'm used to having those conversations. As Joe Biden told me, I get a budget every year. It doesn't mean I don't support something because you don't see it in this one. And you have to have priorities. You have to worry about the fiscal path. This is a president who believes in showing a pathway to deficit reduction. You ain't got to agree with it, but he's had a path to deficit reduction in every budget. Um, and he finds that incredibly important. So everything can't happen in every budget. And it's a tough job, but got to do that in other ways in prior careers. So
Yeah.
you have to have priorities, or to me, if you don't prioritize, you care about nothing. And priorities show that you actually push for and care about the things that you bothered to put in your budget and push for. Again, it doesn't mean you don't care about the other things, but there's a time and a place, and it is a political process to put your eggs in those baskets and go and fight for it. It sometimes takes years.
Yeah.
It sometimes takes years.
You mentioned obviously politics and helping the public understand and maybe naively build kind of momentum around demand for you know fiscal stewardship and setting priorities and those sorts of things. What can we all do, you all do, to enhance transparency and public understanding of the budget process in a way that makes sense to them?
That's an interesting question. One, I think groups like this can, when I spoke about taking things and dialogue out of the political process, have conversations that it's hard for us in DC in these jobs to have. Like, what is an acceptable level of debt? What are the markers? What economic markers? What clearly interest rates when this presidency started were historically low. That's you're going to make different decisions with regard to your fiscal path depending on where interest rates are. Um, but having people like the Bipartisan uh, Policy Center and others think about what those things are, so we aren't just shouting, "Well, this is the debt number. Isn't that too high? What is the trajectory here? Shouldn't what are smart indicators to suggest uh, what target should be across presidencies? We have democracies,
Mm.
4 year intervals. What are those markers administrations, regardless of party, should be shooting for, and the public can hold us responsible to those rather than using blunt instruments that we know really don't tell us much about what we're trying to achieve. I think that would be extremely helpful and something it's hard to do in this climate, but groups like yours
Mhm.
can certainly help us do that.
Well, and comment on that specifically as it relates to what we're going to face in 2025 with the tax cuts, the prospects of the debt limit, those sorts of things. I mean, what advice do you have for us, and what are you going to do about it?
The last debt ceiling nearly broke me. um,
You're not the only person I've heard say
yeah,
that. It was
that
rough.
one nearly broke me. Look, I'm looking at Doug. I came to Harvard, I think, a few months before we did debt ceiling, and I think I said to the new members who were there, "Let me tell you what's going to happen. With lots of ideas about how to deal with the debt, and hold the debt ceiling hostage, and then when it becomes too politically untenable to talk about Social Security and Medicare, everyone's going to say, well, let's cut NDD. NDD is 13% of what we spend in this country. If you care about fiscal path, that ain't how you fix it.
Mm,
And Head Start and NIH did not get us into any of the debt issues we have today. And this lowest common denominator, low hanging fruit, those programs are incredibly helpful and an incredible safety net. And we target them because they are part of the appropriations process that happens every year. Um, and it doesn't really deal with the bigger problems. And that happened. Um, and the greatest success in our work on the debt ceiling was that the budget caps, in my view, were 2 years and not 10. Because I think they're incredible investment. When you tell the American people what non-defense discretionary is, they go, we should be doing more of that and that and that and that. And it gets very easy to lose what we're trying to achieve as a country, and have real honest conversations, especially when elections are coming up. But I hope in 2025 we have more room, from a political standpoint, to be honest with each other and sit down in bipartisan fashion, and let's talk about what we are trying to achieve. Where are we trying to end? In our view, and we'll keep saying it till the cows come home, revenues have to be a part of any conversation about fiscal health in this country. It has to be. We had surplus in 2001. Taxes as a percentage of GDP were 19.5%. They're not that anymore, around 17%. We have to have a conversation. Then they go, ah, that was an outlier. So it has to be a fulsome conversation in our view. I also don't believe that conversation has to happen by using debt ceiling
Right.
as a political tool. Our estimate was if the debt ceiling would have been breached, 8 million jobs in this country alone were in jeopardy. When we were doing debt ceiling, the president had to go to G7 in Japan. Every leader came in, what's happening? What's happening?
Yeah.
Every economy was on pins and needles. We could have a conversation without driving ourselves over a cliff.
Mhm.
And I hope we learn that lesson. I'm optimistic, but I'll stay tuned. But work groups like this are doing outside of that process, before that process, laying the groundwork for smarter conversations that are not just politics, will be helpful. So we can actually maybe pass policy that gets us to an end goal versus just yelling at each other about fiscal health. What does that mean?
Yeah.
What can we be aiming for? Um, and I look forward to having that, and
Amen.
maybe like getting some sleep during it.
We want you to. I think that's the perfect note for us to end on and to get you home to your child on
I
timely.
got to do daycare pickup.
Daycare pickup.
Mama brings home the bacon and
Yeah,
cooks it.
yeah, yeah. And thank you very much.
Thank you.
And thanks to all of you all for attending today and for all of our panelists. It was a terrific discussion, and thank you for your service.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate
And
it.
all I've learned in appropriations, I'll give him about 80% credit, but Chuck Kiefer over there. Yeah.
All right. We've had a lot of shout outs to the team. Yeah. So, all right.